Fractured Secrets, Daughter of Sea and Sky, Book 2, written by AR Colbert, narrated by Jennifer Groberg. Part 2, The Unraveling. Chapter 13. My mother taught me a trick to falling asleep when I was younger. She said to lay perfectly still and concentrate only on my toes. I would stop my wiggles and concentrate on holding them perfectly still. When the muscles had fully relaxed, I would move up my feet to my ankles, calves, knees, thighs, and so on, until every inch of my body had fully succumbed to peaceful rest. I made it to my elbows once. Otherwise, I would always doze off long before reaching my mind. Not tonight, though. Tonight I'd gone from toes to head 20 times over. I counted sheep, whispered lullabies, and flipped my pillow over to the cold side countless times. My belly was a bundle of nerves, and there was just no use trying to sleep. I checked my phone again. It was 2:22 a.m. With only 8 minutes until my alarm would go off, I decided to quit pretending to rest and just get up. My socked feet hit the floor without a sound, and I tiptoed to my dresser, where a bundle of rosemary, water hyssop, and pennyworth awaited me. I slipped a robe over my shoulders, dropped my phone into my pocket, and eased open my door. Gayla's room was on the opposite side of our apartment. I'd waited until I knew she would be tucked into bed, fast asleep, before sneaking out of my room. I'd grown worried earlier in the evening. Gayla had a date with some Agarthian sophomore, and she didn't get in until well after midnight. But that was nearly 2 hours ago. I knew she would be sleeping by now. It was time to act. I'd pored over the words in the dream waltzing pamphlet earlier that evening, though I already knew them by heart, and despite my best efforts, I hadn't located many other works on the topic, aside from a senior thesis written about 25 years ago. Evidently, the technique wasn't commonly practiced anymore. The modern telephone had eliminated the need to communicate through dreams in a sleeping state. Now it was only used for nefarious purposes, and therefore no longer encouraged or taught in the Keeper curriculum. But my reason for attempting it was good. My mother was still locked away in some unknown Keeper prison, being held captive by some anonymous villain for who knows what. I couldn't just call her up, so I tried to reach her by going directly to the source instead. I would visit her in her dreams. The only problem was that I still didn't have any powers of my own. I relied instead on the hopes that something magical stirred deep down inside, even if it was just a fracture of a powerful soul. When combined with the herbs and the spell I'd memorized from my pamphlet, I hoped it would be enough to accomplish a successful dream waltz. And call it what they may, dream waltzing with my mother was in no way dark magic, even if it was technically classified as such. Practicing on Gayla without her expressed permission, on the other hand? I would worry about that another day. Surely Gayla would understand. Between my 2 roommates, she was definitely my best option. Mama Dom would certainly disapprove, and I suspected her mind would be harder to crack. Plus, if she caught me, there would be no hiding my thoughts from my telepathic friend. Nope, it had to be Gayla. I twisted the knob to her bedroom door and silently padded across her lush, fuzzy area rug toward her bed. She lay there, deep in what appeared to be a peaceful slumber. That was good. The deeper into sleep she was, the better my odds were of successfully entering her mind. I'd already planned how it would go. I would make it appear to her like a dream. I had the conversation already memorized. Nothing special, just your standard, "Oh my goodness, we're going to be late for our finals" kind of dream. Every student had them. With the bundle of dried herbs in hand, I raised my arms over my friend and rubbed the leaves back and forth between my palms, grinding them together. Small flakes of the dried plants fell upon her sleeping form, gently dusting her over like a witchy confetti. I silently mouthed the spell from the pamphlet, Almacancia, Descansan, Nitadariel, and I imagined myself entering her mind, searching through the darkness for some semblance of life. Nothing happened. I repeated the spell, a little louder this time, but still not more than a whisper, and I rested the herbs on her chest. With my eyes closed, I focused on the earthy green scent that had filled her room, matching my breathing to hers, and tried once again to find Gayla's thoughts swirling around somewhere within my own mind. Silence. Either Gayla's brain was completely empty, or I was doing this wrong. But my pronunciation was accurate. I'd done the research. My herbs were of high quality, taken directly from Millie's storeroom at the apothecary, and Gayla was definitely deep in sleep, as evidenced by her soft snores. I frowned and decided to try one more time. This time I leaned in close, rested my hands softly upon her shoulders, and spoke the words of the spell aloud, my voice a soft hum. Almacancia descan. Beep, beep, beep. My hand flew to the pocket of my robe to silence the alarm that obnoxiously rang out through the room. Shoot, I thought I'd turned that off. Gayla snapped up into a sitting position, eyes as wide as saucers. I froze, then slowly backed up toward her dresser and squatted down, hoping to blend in with her furniture like a chameleon. Everly? Her brows twisted. Then, glancing down at the pile of broken, crunchy leaves on her pajamas, her nose crinkled. What is going on? You're dreaming. I nodded and gestured around the room. And it's a pretty bizarre dream. You should go back to sleep. I'm sure everything will be back to normal when you wake up. She just stared at me for the longest time. I moved into a thinking position, resting my chin on my fist, as though pretending to be a statue might help me convince her that this was all a dream. Gayla burst into a fit of giggles. I see what you're doing here. She brushed the debris off of her shirt and onto the floor. You're paying me back for the Dylan thing, aren't you? Look, he was begging me to give him your number. He said you were the prettiest mortal he ever laid eyes on. How was I supposed to say no to that? She shrugged innocently. Dylan, I nodded. Yup, this is payback. I had no idea what she was talking about. Maybe you'll think twice before doing something like that again. I stood and wagged my finger at her, then moved to the door, my heart still racing from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Gayla laughed. Touché! Then she shook her head and flicked a dried rosemary leaf off of her sheet. But this was a strange prank. Every time I think I've got you figured out, you do something to keep me guessing again. She pulled the covers back up to her chin and rested on her pillow. Good night, weirdo. Night, Gayla. I closed her bedroom door behind me and leaned against the wall. Clearly, this dark magic business wasn't going to work for me until I manifested some semblance of keeper powers on my own. My options were dwindling. I'd have to find some other fractured soul to help me, or possibly meet with this Rasputin guy myself. If anyone could help me discover my powers outside of the Keeper's laws, it would be the man responsible for training all the other fractured souls in dark magic for the last 100 years. It was time to locate Rasputin. Chapter 14. Sean met me outside of my apartment the next morning. I focused entirely on my schoolwork during the week. Well, that and reading up on dark magic. But I agreed to continue helping my Aunt Millie at her apothecary on the weekends. And thankfully, my relationship with Sean had gotten back to normal since the whole Clayton catastrophe. It made the long walk to her shop much easier. I'd accepted that I probably needed some kind of guardian to watch my back, and he'd accepted that I may be a little harder than average to keep track of. But I helped him with his girl problems, and he helped me with my Agarthian problems, so we were both fine with it. It was a symbiotic relationship. You coming inside? I asked, as we reached the door. The last time we'd walked over to the apothecary together, Sean sprinted off into the sunset the moment he saw Abby. He took a deep breath. Yeah, he said, through the air rushing out of his mouth. I called Abby the other night. and I think we're good. I'm good. You're good, she's good, I'm good. Sound like it's all good then. Let's go. I patted my friend on the back and pulled open the glass door, gesturing for him to go first. How chivalrous of you, he teased. I try. Abby and my Aunt Millie both looked up from a catalog they'd been browsing together on the counter. Hey, guys, Millie called out. Abby's cheeks flushed at the sight of Sean. He ducked his chin and gave her a stiff smile, which resulted in her withering in place. I nudged a covert elbow into his side, and he perked back up, joining them at the counter. I can't stay long, Sean said. I'm meeting a friend for some basketball here in a bit, but I wanted to come and tell you ladies good morning. He held Abby's gaze for a few lingering moments, and her smile returned. Good morning to you, too, Abby said. Sean tapped the countertop and then turned back to me. You still want me to swing back by around 4? I glanced to my aunt for confirmation. Yep, 4 should be great. Go slam some goals or whatever. Sean laughed and headed for the exit. Abby's eyes remained glued to his back until he disappeared past the front window. You look like you need a cold drink, Millie said to her. Or a cold shower. I wiggled my brows at her, but Abby just sighed. I'll get him one of these days. Just you wait and see. Millie and I exchanged a brief glance, but said nothing. Poor Abby. If only she knew the truth. The door chimed, and a tall man with russet-colored, casually mussed hair and faded, slim-fitting jeans swaggered into the shop. His face was scruffy with the 5 o'clock shadow that framed his strong jawline. He owned that rugged cowboy kind of look, and if he didn't appear to be twice my age, I might have even been into it. He reminded me of those laid-back ranchers from back home who loved to crack dry jokes with a straight face and slip in compliments when you least expected it. Only this rancher was kind of hot. He pinned my Aunt Millie with deep blue eyes that whispered of mischief, and his mouth pulled into a crooked half-grin as he slid onto a bar stool in front of the old soda fountain. That's Wyatt, Abby told me quietly. He comes in here at least once a week. Are he and Millie friends? I asked, taking in their easy banter with one another as Abby and I whispered back and forth. He wishes, Abby said with a snort. He's like a loyal little puppy, totally adorable, but he has no idea when to back off and leave your poor aunt alone. I turned back toward the pair, admiring their casual, playful conversation. Millie didn't look like she particularly minded the attention the cowboy gave her. In fact, she seemed to be enjoying herself almost as much as he was. Abby disappeared through the curtain into the back room, drawing Millie's attention back to where I now stood alone. Oh, Wyatt, I want to introduce you to my niece. This is Everly. Nice to meet you, I said, extending a hand. We shook, and Wyatt nodded. That's quite the handshake you got there, girl. A firm handshake is a trademark of a strong woman. It must run in the family. He winked. All right, Millie said with a smirk. Knock it off. What can I get you today, Wyatt? Besides a date? He kept a completely straight face, but his twinkling eyes gave him away. I don't know. You got any specials? Not for you, Millie teased back. I busied myself with organizing bags and rolls of receipt paper under the counter while they flirted back and forth. It was nice to see Millie with a man. She'd never been involved in a serious relationship that I was aware of. Was Wyatt her soulmate? He was certainly good-looking enough to be a keeper. Perhaps that was a reason he kept coming back into the shop. But if that were the case, wouldn't she know it? If I had a soulmate, I'd probably just run away with him, leave this messy world behind and live for 1,000 years in blissful amour. Everly hasn't gotten her powers yet, but yes, she's Atlantean too. Millie's tone had changed. Her words clipped now. I hadn't been paying close enough attention to know how the conversation swung back around to me, and I was kicking myself for it. What did Wyatt care about me? I'm sure they'll kick in soon. and then we'll celebrate. The first glass of ambrosia is on me. Speaking of, you got any of them ambrosia berries around here?" He offered a smooth transition away from what was obviously a touchy subject, and I was grateful for it. "You know that I don't." The sound of a smile had returned to Millie's voice. "Nah, you're right. I know you like to play by the rules." Wyatt sounded a little dejected. "But that won't stop me from coming back next week." "I know that it won't." "See you later, Mills." "Bye, Wyatt." I waited until the front door chimed to stand back up again. "Phew," I said, reaching for my head. "I think I stood up too fast." The room spun for a second, and then a dull throb started at the base of my skull. "Go on into the back and have a seat. I'm about to start counting inventory anyway, so I'll join you." Abby stepped back through the curtain. "I'll take over out here," she said with a smile. It was no secret that Abby hated counting inventory. Millie pushed open the curtain for me, and we stepped into the back room of her shop. I slid into a spot at the table, resting my forehead on my hand, and Millie lit some kind of herbal incense on a shelf in the corner. "Is Wyatt a keeper too?" "He is," she said, busying herself with a new shipment packaged up on the floor. "Atlantean." "Are you guys, close?" She looked up with a raised brow. "We are friends, yes." "Just friends?" "He's not my soulmate, if that's what you're asking." "Oh." It was, but I felt it would be rude to pry. Millie's shoulders stiffened as she returned to her work, so I didn't think she was too interested in carrying the conversation any further. It surprised me when she spoke again. "My soulmate died 150 years ago. I was a young woman, and thinking we had eternity together, I didn't cherish the time as I should have. We'd only known each other a few short years. He was taken from this earth too early." Her hands stopped moving, and her chest rose and fell with a deep breath as she stared off into memories I couldn't see. "How?" I stopped myself, realizing the question was probably insensitive, but Millie answered anyway. "He was murdered." "What? I thought you were immortal." "Not exactly. We live for about 1,000 years. We heal quickly and are difficult to kill, but it's not impossible with the right amount of power and malice in one's soul." "But who would do such a thing?" Millie sighed. "There are certain factions of keepers who have different goals than the rest of us. They don't believe in protecting humans and keeping the earth safe. They're more interested in taking control of it themselves, even if that means eliminating other keepers who stand in their way." "I'm sorry, Millie." "Me too. But I can't lose hope. His soul may still return to this earth. We may be reunited yet." We sat quietly for a few minutes. She sorted through the package, and I rested my head until the throbbing in my skull dulled to a slight nuisance rather than a major distraction. Then I remembered something Wyatt said, and it got my wheels turning. "Are ambrosia berries a real thing? I thought it was just a liquid." Millie laughed. "Yes. How do you think the drink is made?" I suppose that made sense. I'd read stories from the ancient Greek myths that suggested Olympians ate the ambrosia rather than just drinking it, and I learned more and more how true many of those stories had been. "Where does it grow?" "Only in Olympus, and it's illegal to possess the berries on Earth. They really don't even like us bringing the beverage down here, but they turn a blind eye in most cases. You know, it's very dangerous if it falls into the hands of mortals, and you—" she looked pointedly in my direction. "You definitely need to stay away from the stuff." "So Wyatt was joking then when he asked about them?" "Yes," she smiled. "He loves to tease me about being a rule breaker because he knows how absurd the idea is to me. He's always playfully asking for black market herbs and berries." There was a black market for these kinds of things? I'd have to file that little tidbit away for later. Why does he want you to break the rules? Because then I'll go on a date with him. I swore to my soulmate that I would never betray him for another man. But Wyatt lost his soulmate as well, long before I did. She's never returned to this earth as far as he knows, and he says it would be better to bide our time together rather than pine for lost lovers alone. But I can't lose hope that he'll one day return. I sighed. It turned out Millie was quite the romantic, but her story was so tragic. It broke my heart to hear the truth. I'm sure he will, Millie. I'm sure he will. Chapter 15. Our apartment was quiet when I returned after work. I thanked Sean for walking me home and quickly retreated into my room, closing the door behind me so I wouldn't be disturbed. The stack of books about keeper history I'd accumulated loomed over my desk. One of these days, I would sit down and read each one cover to cover. But for now, I would just continue to skim only the areas that interested me. Today, that meant looking for any mention of ambrosia berries. It's not that I wanted to taste the illicit berries for myself, even if I was a little curious about them. I was more interested in how one might obtain such a thing. If there was truly a black market for keepers, then I suspected there would be a good chance I might find a link to Rasputin through it. After all, how else would a discriminating fractured soul find the ingredients necessary to practice dark magic? None of the information in my books was particularly relevant to today's modern society, though. There was an old Greek story about Tantalus, a man who decided to steal ambrosia berries from some unsuspecting Olympians and deliver them back to mortals on Earth. Things didn't end well for him. So it was no wonder the berries and other black market items would be carefully guarded these days. No one in his right mind would want to pay the consequences Tantalus had to pay. I was still flipping through the musty pages of old books when a savory smell wafted by, pulling my attention back to the present. I perked up, glancing out the window at the empty sidewalk below, before determining it must have been coming from our own kitchen. I'd been cooped up in my room for a couple of hours, so it was about time for me to take a break anyway. I eased open my bedroom door to find Dom humming in the kitchen, rinsing brown rice under the faucet. Gayla sat curled up on the corner of the couch watching some reality TV show. "She's alive," she said with a chuckle. I think I was brought back to life by this divine scent that crept under my door. What are you making out here, Dom? It smells amazing. Just a simple sheet pan dinner. I've got some chopped broccoli, sweet potato, peppers, and chicken, drizzled with olive oil and seasonings, roasting in the oven. My mouth was watering. I had no idea you could cook. Mama Dom is good at everything, Gayla said. I'll get this rice going, and we can eat shortly. Dom turned back to her work, and I sidled in next to Gayla on the couch. Dom really was good at everything, it seemed. She was a star student, a caretaker, and above all else, a rule follower, like Millie. Gayla, on the other hand, liked to play in the gray areas. Hey, Gayla, I whispered so Dom couldn't hear. You know what would go great with dinner tonight? A glass of ambrosia. She flashed a grin. You little rebel. You know you can't have any of that. I know, I sighed. But out of curiosity, where do you get it? It's only made in Olympus. There's just one approved manufacturer of it, since it's so potent and dangerous in the wrong hands. They have it tightly monitored. Unfortunately, that means they can also charge whatever they want for it, and it's not cheap. She wrinkled her nose. If it was expensive for Gayla, then it was definitely out of my league. If it's so expensive, how are all these college kids getting a hold of it? There was a ton of it at that St. A's party. Rich parents? She shrugged. She wasn't biting. I would have to be a little more direct to get the information I was really after. But theoretically, they could make their own, right? If they got their hands on some of the berries? She narrowed her eyes, and for a moment I thought I'd crossed a line. But thankfully, she relaxed again and continued talking. Theoretically, yeah, I guess you're right. But it's hard to come across those berries on Earth. Smuggling them out of Olympus is no easy task. Where would they be, though? I mean, surely there's not just some ambrosia store sitting on a corner in Manhattan. No, you'd probably have to go through the black market. And how would one access that black market? She raised her brows. You're asking lots of questions. If I didn't know any better, I might think you were trying to break some laws. I don't know of any mortal laws against ambrosia, and I am just a mortal after all, I said, with what I hoped looked like an innocent grin. Her eyes twinkled. That's true. You're crafty. I like it. So, do you know how someone might hypothetically get some of those berries? If I did, would I be able to get a couple as payment? Sure, yeah, if that someone could actually find some. Her lip twitched as she considered it. Well, if I knew, I wouldn't legally be able to tell you. But think about it. You said you saw lots of ambrosia at the St. A's party. That might lead you to believe they had access to that sort of thing. You know, if there were any dealers on campus, you might find them at St. A's. But obviously I didn't tell you that. Right, of course. She grinned and turned back to the TV. It wasn't long before Dom called us over to eat, and the food was as good as it smelled. We kept our conversation light, discussing school and Gayla's lame date with the Agarthian boy. I mean, I know they can't all be charming, but this guy seriously had zero personality. It was like talking to a wall. Gayla scraped up her remaining rice into a neat little pile that she scooped into her mouth. So I take it he wasn't a siren then? Unfortunately, I'd had a few too many close interactions with the Agarthian sirens who could make you fall in love with them, or do anything else they commanded, just with a gleam in their eyes and a strange harmony in their words. This is how the hunters were so successful, like Tate and Osborne. But the mean girl, Camille, and the hot actor, Clayton, also had the ability to glamour. Ha! I wish he was! What was his power, then? I knew of the other Agarthian mean girls, one with the power to shift into a cat, and one with some kind of weird wind power or something. But other than some of the Greek myths, which I couldn't be certain were even true, I wasn't entirely sure what other powers existed among the different keeper races. Just a basic shifter, and not even a cool one. I think he said he's like a parakeet or something. You went out with Adam Pulaski, right? I think he shifts into a peregrine falcon, Dom said. Big difference. Gayla shrugged. A bird's a bird. You're a mess. Dom laughed and stood to gather our dishes. I followed her into the kitchen to help her clean up. Hey, she said quietly once we were alone. Whatever you're considering, don't. Huh? I set down the dish brush. You and Gayla were talking about something while I was cooking. Whatever it was, it's a bad idea. Were you eavesdropping on us? No, but I can't help it when your thoughts are screaming from across a room. And I'm glad I couldn't hear exactly what you were saying, because a little bit I picked up in your mind when you joined us at the table was enough for me to know that it's bad news. Well, maybe that's a sign that you shouldn't get involved then. Believe me, I won't, and I hope you won't get involved with whatever scheme you're cooking up either. Chapter 16. I've always been a bad listener, and despite Dom's best attempts to keep me safe, I lived up to my reputation as I snuck out of our apartment a few days later. Gayla would sleep in as she usually did, and Dom had an early class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so it was my first real chance to get out of there unnoticed. But even if I wasn't the world's greatest rule follower, I was no thief. That's why when I stepped out onto the hall, I immediately turned back to retrieve the bikini I'd unintentionally taken from the St. A's house the night I ran from Clayton. One day I might return Tate's jacket, too. Or maybe not. It still smelled like him, and as much as I hated to admit it even to myself, I liked having it around. Besides, he knew I had it. But not the bikini. Those teeny pieces of fabric had to go home. Thankfully, Gayla slept like the dead, so I was back out in the hall in no time, dashing toward the stairs just in case someone I knew might be in the elevators. By the time I made it out onto the road, I was feeling really good. My plan was coming together beautifully. I'd go to the St. A's house and see about getting some ambrosia berries. I wouldn't keep them for myself, of course. I didn't need them. But I wanted to establish a good relationship with whatever kind of black market dealer may reside there. Then, once we were on good enough terms, I'd ask him about Rasputin. It should be easy enough. I'd seen enough crime dramas on TV to know that drug dealers were usually pretty friendly, as long as you kept them paid and didn't snitch. And I'd been saving up cash from helping out at Millie's shop, so paying him wouldn't be an issue. Plus, I didn't expect rich keepers to be quite as scary as the drug dealers on TV. It would be fine. Just fine. But as I neared the house, memories of the party with Clayton came tumbling back into my mind. I remembered how he'd glamored the other students out of the way so he could get me alone in the basement. The pool was entrancing with its blue and purple glow until I went under. I truly thought I would die that day. And maybe I would have if Tate hadn't arrived when he did. It was pretty ironic, actually. Tate, the guy who asked Clayton to nearly kill me so that he could extract my soul and finish the job himself, he was the one who'd rescued me. Maybe he wasn't such a great hunter after all. Not that I was complaining. I turned the corner onto Riverside and stopped dead in my tracks. My luck couldn't have been any worse. Standing on the sidewalk, looking directly at me, was Sean. He casually dribbled a basketball, chatting with a friend. Maybe, just maybe, I could still get out of there before he registered that I was walking alone without a keeper guardian. I spun on my heel and took off in the opposite direction. "Everly!" Darn my bad luck. "What are you doing out here?" I stopped, filling my lungs with air, before I turned to face him with a sweet smile. "Oh, hey, Sean! Didn't see you there." He narrowed his brows at me. I was so totally busted. "Okay, I did, but I got nervous that you would be upset I was out here without you." "So you were just gonna run away?" "Yeah, basically." I turned to his friend. "You look really familiar. Have we met?" "This is Devon," Sean said. "I think you guys met briefly at the Keep." "Oh, yeah, in the Hamptons. Well, it's good to see you again. Guess I'll catch you guys later." I tried to spin off and head back to the apartment again, but I didn't even make it one step. Sean reached out and grabbed my arm. "Not so fast. You forgot to answer my question. What are you doing out here, Ev?" His friend, Devon, looked away, trying his best to hide a grin. What exactly had Sean told him about me? The thought of getting chewed out by my babysitter in the middle of New York was not only embarrassing, it was infuriating. I yanked my arm loose. "I was running an errand." "Alone?" "Yes, it's kind of a personal matter." "Personal or not, you shouldn't be running around out here alone. You know that can be dangerous." "Trust me, no one remembers better than me." I pulled the stringy little black swimsuit from my purse and dangled it in front of the boys by one tiny strap. Sean's eyes widened. "Is that a swimsuit?" Devon asked. "Yep. Want to tell him how I got it, Sean? Go ahead." It was childish for me to bring up the night Sean let his guard down, and I almost died as a result. But I was mad, and I needed to get myself out of this without Sean discovering the true nature of my visit to the St. A's house. Sean shook his head. "I could have returned that for you if you'd asked. You didn't have to come back here alone." "It's embarrassing enough as it is. I hate reliving that night, and I would especially hate for anyone else to have to remember me shivering on the city streets, wearing nothing but an itty-bitty wet bikini and a hunter's suit jacket. Devon's brows raised. I don't want to know. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to return this, like I had planned before you interrupted me. I huffed and tried to move past the boys, but Sean stepped into my path. I'll go with you. Devon nodded. Yep, I don't know what happened, but I'm getting the feeling you might need a little extra backup. I'm fine. Those words had been ringing on repeat through my brain all morning. It had become like a mantra, but even after saying it 1,000,000 times, I wasn't so sure I believed it. The boys didn't care if I thought I was fine anyway. They moved to the sides of me like sentinels as I stepped up to the door and gave a quick knock. No one answered. It was 9 in the morning. Surely someone in that house was awake, right? I knocked again, and finally a messy-haired guy in gray joggers answered the door. He was barefoot and shirtless, and it took me a minute to find my words. I held out the swimsuit, still dangling by a string. I think this is yours. He yawned and took the bathing suit without saying another word. He looked bored and surprisingly unsurprised to be receiving a bikini delivery first thing in the morning. I suspected he'd seen much stranger things in that house. I tried to get a glimpse of the room behind him, though I don't know what I expected to see. A group of guys huddled around a coffee table, separating illicit berries with a razor blade? That was silly. There were just a bunch of sleepy college kids. All right, well, bye. The door slammed in my face. I turned to Sean with my hands on my hips. See? Fine. The boys escorted me back to our apartment, but I had no interest in entertaining them. Gayla was awake when we got there, and she poured them each a cup of coffee while I sulked in my room. Dom came home shortly after that, and I overheard her whispering with Sean after Gayla hopped in the shower. And by overheard, I mean I had my ear pressed against the door, straining to make out any syllable I possibly could. It was obvious that they were talking about me. Yep, Sean said. She was there all right, but I don't think anything suspicious was going on. She was just returning that swimsuit. Dom said. I could have sworn there was more to it than that. What did you hear her say, exactly? Nothing, but I got some seriously dark vibes from her the other night. I know she's up to something. Well, it's not at the St. A's house. All right, Dom sighed. Thanks for following up on it anyway. Anytime. Let me know if you hear anything else. I'm happy to check it out. Will do. And thank you too, Devon. It takes a village. No prob, Dom. The front door opened and closed, and a few minutes later I heard Dom retreat to her room. Speaking of snitches, the drug dealers would hate Dom. I couldn't believe she tattled to Sean about some suspicion that I might be up to something bad. I mean, yeah, she was right, but that was beside the point. And then to say, it takes a village, like I was some toddler they all had to scramble around after? I was livid, and I wasn't going to give up so easily. I was going back to the St. A's house the first chance I had, and I would do it again and again until I found out where this Rasputin guy hung out. Childish or not, I would do whatever it took to get to the bottom of this mess. If none of my so-called friends were willing to help me find my mom, I would have to find someone who would, even if that meant mingling with black market drug dealers or fractured souls. I was going to find my mom, or die trying. Chapter 17. The next afternoon, I found myself back on the streets, headed toward Riverside Drive. The girls thought I was studying with Sean, and Sean thought I was spending the afternoon at home. It wasn't exactly an airtight alibi, but it was enough to allot me some freedom for a couple of hours. I knew morning visits wouldn't pay off with this crowd, so I had to go later in the day, and just to make sure I didn't run into Sean or anyone else who might rat me out, I took the long way to the St. A's house, going several blocks out of my way just to be safe. I slowed as I neared the corner, peeking around the building like a child playing hide and seek. If Sean was sent to intercept me again, I was going to lose my mind. But the sidewalk was clear of anyone I recognized. Lucky for him. With a deep breath, I mustered up all the courage I had and stepped up to the door, giving it 2 quick knocks. Once again, there was no answer, but it was after lunchtime. Surely these guys weren't still asleep. I reached up to knock again, but before my knuckles made contact with the door, it swung open. "Everly?" Tingly chills immediately covered my body. It reminded me of the feeling I got when the hairdresser massaged my scalp during a wash and cut. It was delightful, but in this case it came with a warning. "Tate! Oh, my goodness, what are you doing here?" "I live here. What are you doing here?" Shoot. Where was another bikini when I needed one? It wasn't all that surprising that Tate was a member of the St. A's. He was ridiculously good-looking and had that carefree, can't-hold-me-down attitude that came with extreme wealth. But I felt foolish for not considering the fact that I might run into him here. Now, I just had to come up with a reasonable excuse for knocking on his door. "I was just wondering if you were recruiting." "Seriously?" I bit my lip. Why did he look so unconvinced? Was that a strange request? I really should have studied up more on how this not-so-secret society worked. "Yeah, I might be interested in joining." He narrowed his eyes, drawing my attention back to the golden flecks that sparkled in the afternoon light. "You don't get to ask to be recruited, and we don't let fractured souls join." A breath escaped me. I'd already come this far, twice. There was no telling if I'd be able to escape my apartment without a guardian again anytime soon, and I didn't want to put off my secret little mission any longer. Tate wouldn't stop me. Not today. "Okay, do you want to know the truth?" This was probably a huge mistake, but I was getting desperate. "I always want the truth." "I heard this was the place to go for certain remedies that aren't available at the apothecary." He crossed his arms over his chest and leaned against the doorframe. The movement stirred up a familiar smell, the comforting scent of Tate that I'd grown accustomed to on his jacket. It must have been some predatory advantage for the hunters. He could lure his victims in with his attractive features and a smell that destroyed our defenses and actually made us feel safe with the man who wanted our poor little fractured souls. I shook it off. "Please tell me you're not another ambrosia junkie." He quirked an eyebrow. "I certainly wouldn't have pegged you for one." "Ambrosia? No, I don't care about that stuff." It was true, but it was also my excuse for wanting to meet the dealer. I needed a plan B, stat. "I actually need something else. It's kind of an unconventional remedy. Do you have access to, that kind of stuff?" "What kind of stuff?" A pretty little blonde girl stepped into the doorway beside Tate, sliding in close to his side. She wiggled her way under his arm so that it draped casually around her, with his hand settling on her waist. A jolt of jealousy shot through me, and I instantly rejected it. Why would I be jealous of some girl with Tate? He wanted me dead. I couldn't forget that. She leaned her head gently against his side. Her hair was slightly darker than Gayla's and Dom's, with more golden yellow tones, but her eyes shared the same deep brown, and she was undoubtedly Olympian. She wore a flimsy white tank top and short, loose-fitting pajama bottoms that exposed more of her toned legs than I cared to see. But as an Olympian, I knew she wasn't Tate's soulmate. No bonding there. Not that I would care. "Nothing, Viv. She's just a mortal." The girl studied me closely, then stood on her tiptoes to whisper into Tate's ear. I ignored the way it made my stomach lurch to watch their casual exchange. Even my skin tingled harder, as if in protest. The sight literally stung. Tate locked eyes with her and nodded. Then he pulled his arm free and crossed it back over his chest again. What is it that you're after, sweetheart? The girl put her hands on her hips. Sweetheart? How does a girl like that get off calling me sweetheart? No, I needed to control myself. This was a real shot at getting to find the dealer. I needed to keep my very mortal reactions in check. I also needed to think of something to ask for. It's for my friend, actually. She's sick. Keepers don't get sick, Tate said. Sick of school, I mean. She knows what her future holds, and school is just a waste of time preventing her from her true calling. Her true calling, huh? The girl smirked. And what is that? She's a seer. I held my breath, waiting to see what their reactions would be. Tate would undoubtedly know I was talking about Gayla, but did this other girl, Viv, know Gayla too? I really should have thought up a better story before spouting off lies that might get me and my friend into trouble. When neither of them spoke, I continued. The schoolwork is becoming a grind, and it's distracting her from her visions. She's struggling, so I was hoping to find something to help her focus. Do you know anyone who has access to anything like that? Viv's mouth twisted to one side. I wished I had the power to read her mind, like Dom. Was she about to throw me back out on the street and call up the council to warn them of mortals creeping around in keeper business? I can do you one better, she said. She closed her eyes and held out a hand. Tate let out a sigh of exasperation and focused on something across the street. I wasn't sure what was happening, so I waited, barely breathing. After a minute of silence, I lifted my hand, wondering if she was motioning for me to take hers and follow her somewhere. But before I touched her, a brown paper envelope, square-shaped and slightly larger than her palm, came flying out of nowhere from inside the house and landed softly upon her skin. She opened her eyes with a grin and extended the envelope toward me. Did you just... I couldn't even find a word for what I'd just witnessed. Did you just conjure that up out of thin air? She rolled her eyes. Mortals. No, I didn't conjure it up. I'm not a witch. I'm telekinetic. I just pulled it out of my drawer upstairs and brought it down here. With her mind. I tried to look less amazed, but that was really incredible. Thanks, I said. What should I tell my friend? Does she need to take it twice a day with meals or something like that? Viv groaned. No, these will help induce the visions. She should only take them when she's ready for a major mind trip. They're powerful, and they might knock her off her feet for a couple of hours afterward, so tell her not to take one unless she's somewhere safe for a while. Got it. I fumbled around in my purse looking for some cash. Do you know how much I owe? Then it dawned on me that this petite little blonde girl was the one who'd given me the illicit substances. She was nothing like I'd expected. Wait, are you the dealer? She laughed, the sound like 1,000 tinkling bells. This one's on me, and never call me a dealer again. Then she turned to Tate. Keep your mortal friends out of here. She smacked him on the rear end and turned back into the house, leaving us alone once again. She's right, Everly. You need to stay away from here. This isn't the crowd you want to get involved with. Concern tugged at his brows, but he didn't say anything more. I looked down at the small envelope in my hand, feeling the pills tucked inside. I will. Especially now that I knew Tate was involved with the St. A's, I'd have to keep my distance. One false move, and I might just get my soul extracted. He moved to close the door, and I stepped back down onto the sidewalk before calling out to him one more time. I still have your suit jacket, by the way. The corner of his mouth pulled up. I know. He closed the door. The tingling sensation immediately vanished, and somehow I felt lonelier without it. Chapter 18. The brown envelope sat propped up against the stack of books on my desk. I'd been staring at it for hours, days, really. I wasn't sure what to do with it. There was a part of me that wondered what would happen if I took one. Would it be strong enough for a mortal to have a vision? Would it be possible to see my mom? Or would it be so powerful that it would knock me dead the moment it touched my tongue? The concern Tate held in his eyes the day I got the pills told me it would likely be the latter. That, combined with the sudden reappearance of my little owl friend, was enough to prevent me from trying. So far, anyway. I glanced to the window where the bird sat. There was no denying that he was here for me. He stared into my bedroom, not even pretending to act like a normal owl. He'd also been hanging around on campus any time I walked to class or the honeypot. If I thought Sean was bad, this owl was relentless. I would never be able to go anywhere without some kind of guardian again, and it felt wrong to do something illegal, like take a powerful vision-inducing drug while he watched. Plus, I wasn't a drug kind of girl. I didn't even like taking Tylenol. But would my mom want me to do it if it meant locating her and bringing her safely home again? That was the burning question. I just had to do my research before making any decisions. On Saturday morning, I found myself back at Millie's shop. Abby didn't argue when I offered to take the inventory duties for the day, and thankfully Millie was busy with customers most of the morning, which meant I had the back room to myself. I worked a little, but mostly I scoured Millie's old textbooks for information on what the pills might do. It was too bad I didn't know the name for them. That would have made my job much easier. After a couple of hours of flipping through the dusty old tomes, I was overcome by the same throbbing headache I'd experienced the week before. It had appeared a few times since that first day, but never as strong. Today it came on hard and fast, like I'd been hit with a baseball bat. I rubbed gingerly at the base of my skull, then stamped out into the front of the apothecary to call for my aunt. "What's the matter, Ev?" "My head," I mumbled. "It's throbbing again." Millie frowned. "Come on, let's see if we can get it fixed." I slid back into the spot in her back room, resting my cheek on the cool tabletop, while Millie once again lit the herbal incense that seemed to relieve my symptoms last time. She then set to work on mixing up some kind of medicinal draught. I watched her work, trying to concentrate on her movements instead of the pain that refused to abate. She had her back to me, busying herself with measuring out a powder I couldn't identify, when suddenly another figure appeared in the storeroom. It was as if he materialized before my eyes. It happened in an instant, faster than a blink. I sat up and rubbed my eyes with the heels of my hands, squeezing them shut hard before opening them again. The figure was still there. He turned, and I recognized him instantly. Devon, Sean's friend, grinning at me. "Millie, I think I'm hallucinating." My aunt turned around then and dropped the glass jar containing the powder. It hit the floor and shattered, sending up a cloud of white dust and spraying shards of glass across the floor into a broken mosaic around our feet. Devon turned to the source of commotion and froze as they locked eyes. So it wasn't a hallucination then. Millie could see him too. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and a smile slowly found its way to her lips. Do you recognize me?" she asked. Devon shook his head. "I don't think we've met, but yeah, it's weird. I feel like I do recognize you." He stepped forward and lifted a hand toward my aunt, then dropped it again. In his other hand, he held a red envelope. "This is Sean's friend, Devon. Devon, this is my Aunt Millie. How on earth did you just appear here?" Neither of them paid me or my words any attention. They continued to stare at one another like a child might watch the flames flicker on her birthday candles. There was awe and wonder and a longing, and it creeped me out. "Guys?" Millie finally pulled her gaze away from the boy and focused on me as a single tear broke free from her lid and rolled slowly down her cheek. I think I should be the one doing the introductions here. Everly, this is my soulmate. My jaw dropped. I turned to Devon. What? Is that true? He still had his eyes glued to my aunt. I don't know, maybe. I'm only 18. I've never met my soulmate before, but yeah, I think it's true. It feels like your name is written on my bones. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't know how else to say it. I can't describe this feeling. I just want to hold you in my arms. Another tear fell from Millie's eye. She nodded and extended her arms. Devon rushed forward, and they wrapped each other in an intimate embrace, the way lovers would do. I had to look away. She's like 400 years older than you. Maybe you shouldn't rush into things, I said, staring into the opposite corner. They ignored me. After a moment, I laid my head back on the table and closed my eyes, tuning them out and breathing in the smell of the incense that finally began to fill the room. I wasn't sure how much time had passed before Millie finally spoke again. Everly's right. You're so young. We don't have to rush back into a relationship. But when you're ready, I'm here. I've been waiting for you to return, just like I promised. I'm sorry, I don't remember. I know. Millie wiped her eyes. The mind is weak, but the soul knows. I'll catch you up on everything when you're ready, but your past life shouldn't diminish your current life. We'll be together, but only when you're ready. I'm ready now, Devon said. Now that I've met you, I can't imagine not being with you. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen, and I'd seen plenty of crazy things over the last several weeks. As if he just remembered I was in the room, Devon turned to me then with a goofy grin. Mind if I marry your aunt? You just met. Maybe you should date her first. His 18-year-old body had just begun to fill out into that of a man. His muscles were lean, and his curly brown hair was a mess. Next to my aunt's perfectly put-together figure, he looked like a joke. She was hundreds of years old, and even to the average mortal eye, she appeared to be about 40. They would certainly draw negative attention, and yet I suspected neither of them could care any less. Oh, Devon held out the red envelope. I almost forgot why I came. This is for you. Millie took the envelope with a frown. Urgent? What could it be? She slid a thumb under the seal and pulled out a small note. While she read silently to herself, I turned back to Devon. So, are you a messenger? He nodded. Yeah, normally I'd be busy with school, but since the Order of the Keepers convention is coming up, they've called upon all of us to help with the increase in correspondence. So, you just squeeze in teleporting between classes? Devon laughed. Yeah, pretty much. It was amazing to see it happen. I knew it was possible. After all, my own mother was supposedly a messenger just like this. But to actually witness it in person was beyond incredible. Millie clutched the note she'd received and looked up to the ceiling. With a heavy sigh, she refocused her attention back to me and took the chair across from me at the small table. Everly, dear, I've just found the source of your headaches. Great! What is it? I was ready for some relief. She slid the note across the table for me to examine. The paper was just a lab report. I picked it up and scanned the words, my pulse picking up in speed with each line of text. This wasn't an ordinary lab report. This was a keeper lab, specializing in elements outside of human comprehension. And my last vitamin, the one I'd given to Millie to research, brought up some very interesting results. How sure are you that this is accurate? Her face split into a full smile. 100%. But why? She wanted to keep you safe. Millie's smile vanished, and she grew serious again. "Everly, darling, this changes everything. Those vitamins were designed to bind your powers. Keeper powers. There's no way your mother would have utilized something with such a high strength if you were fractured." "So, I'm a keeper?" She nodded and reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Welcome to life as an Atlantean." Chapter 19. When will they kick in? My heart was thundering against my chest. I was Atlantean, full-blooded, a keeper, with powers. Holy cow. "How long has it been since your last dose?" "About a week," I said. "Maybe 8 days." "I expect it will be soon, but it's hard to say. Most binding substances are designed to be stored in the body long-term, so that if you were to miss a dose, you would never know it. But with these specific pills coming from an unaccredited supplier—" "Is that the nice way of saying black market?" Millie frowned and ignored my question. "It's hard to say. It could be any minute, or it could be a few more weeks. For many young keepers, their powers aren't ignited until some kind of outside stimulus forces them into action." "Right. I've heard about that. That's why Tate and Clayton had brought me to the edge of my life so many times. They were trying to terrify the powers out of me, which gave me an idea." "Thank you, Millie." I wrapped her in a hug, nearly squeezing the life out of her. When I released her, I noticed Devon still standing awkwardly off to the side. "I'll, let you two get back to catching up." I dashed through the curtain back into the front of the shop. Atlantean. I still couldn't wrap my mind around it. I had to test it out, and I knew just the thing. I would just have to get alone first. "Hey, Abby, I'm gonna go grab some lunch. If Millie asks where I am, let her know I'm with Sean." The lie slipped out too easily. I would probably get caught, but hopefully it wouldn't matter by then. I planned to have my powers kicked into high gear in no time. I wouldn't need a guardian anymore. I practically skipped down the sidewalk back to my apartment. Nothing could keep me down today. I was a powerful, immortal being. About 3 blocks away from our building, just on the outskirts of campus, I spotted Viv, the Olympian dealer from the St. A's, chatting with some scrawny human-looking boy. A smug smile pulled at my lips. "Sorry, Tate, your girl is cheating on you with a mortal." Except she wasn't. She pulled an envelope from her pocket and covertly handed it off to the boy. I took another look, just to be sure I knew what I was seeing. That kid was definitely mortal. There was no way such a sickly-looking boy could be a keeper. But his smile wasn't sickly at all. No, it was strong and menacing. Viv gave the boy a stern look and then disappeared around a corner. His grin widened, and then he looked up and locked eyes with me from across the street. The smile faded into a scowl, and he scurried off in the opposite direction. That was strange. I should have probably just let it be, but a nagging curiosity urged me to follow him. I couldn't resist a good mystery. Why would a black market dealer be conspiring with a mortal? Unless he wasn't a mortal. Not a keeper, not a mortal. That only left one other option. This kid was a fractured soul. I picked up my pace, fully convinced now that I was going to catch him doing some dark magic in an alleyway somewhere. I shouldn't have cared. I knew now that I didn't need the fractured souls or Rasputin anymore. All I had to do was take one of the vision-inducing pills to locate my mother, and with keeper powers, I could search their territories until I rescued her myself. But then again, the visions might not work, not for an Atlantean. Wouldn't it still be easier to dream waltz right into her mind and ask where she was being held? There weren't any Atlantean powers that would give me such an advantage. Even when mine did emerge, it didn't mean I'd be able to locate her. So maybe meeting up with Rasputin wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. I would just have to do it before my powers emerged, or he would refuse to see me. I was certain he wouldn't agree to meet with a full keeper, but if I could convince him that I was fractured... I'd been so wrapped up in my thoughts that I lost track of the fractured boy. Shoot. I stopped on the sidewalk, looking down the road to my left and right, before deciding to stick to my original plan. All this fractured soul and black market dealer nonsense was going to get me in trouble if I wasn't careful. I turned back in the direction of my apartment and nearly ran right into the last person I wanted to see. Osborne sneered at me. "Looking for someone?" "No." I shrugged him off and tried to pass him. "Oh, I think you were. I saw you spying." "Spying on who?" "The fractured boy. Is he one of your friends?" "I don't know what you're talking about." I tried to push past him again, but he reached out and grabbed my arm. "Ow! Get off of me!" "I know you're involved, and I'll put the pieces together soon. Mark my words." I yanked my arm again, hard, but Osborne's dirty fingers gripped me even tighter. I would probably be bruised. "She said, get off." A wave of electricity danced across my skin. Tate, my dark night was saving me yet again. Osborne's grip loosened, but he didn't let go. "You need to do a better job of keeping your pet on her leash. She's stepping dangerously close to my territory, and I won't hesitate to do your job for you if the occasion presents itself. I'll gladly take the credit, too, especially if it gets me into that shiny seat they supposedly have reserved for you." "Enough." I'd never seen Tate so angry, except for maybe when Clayton tried to drown me. "Get your hands off of her, now." Osborne's lip curled into a seriously frightening snarl. He did as Tate asked, but not before giving my arm one final squeeze as hard as he could. I bit down on a whimper. He wouldn't get the satisfaction of knowing he'd hurt me. I waited until he turned away before trying to rub the feeling back into my bicep. Tate reached out to see the damage, and a soothing warmth spread from his fingers the moment his hand made contact with my arm. "Oh, wow." I closed my eyes briefly and inhaled, appreciating the comfort of his touch. "Is that some kind of healing power?" "What?" Tate's head tilted to one side, but he left his hand lingering gently on my arm. The feeling of his touch spread through me like hot cocoa on a cold day, warming me from the inside out and completely distracting me from the pain. "That warm feeling." "You can feel that?" He yanked his hand quickly away. I wished he would put it back, but at least the soreness had disappeared before he removed it. "No, I can't share any healing powers." "So what is it then?" He shrugged. "Probably your imagination." That wasn't true. He'd admitted to feeling it, too. I wondered if he also got the tingling sensation when we were near each other. Maybe that's how the hunters knew when they were close to their prey. Tate turned back toward Riverside Drive, but I wasn't going to let him get away so easily. This wasn't a frequently traversed area outside of the campus, so he better have had a good explanation for how he suddenly appeared when I was in danger again. "It's strange how we keep running into each other in a city this big." I pursed my lips and shot him an accusing look, scurrying to keep up with his long strides. "Nah, it's not strange. I've been following you." "What?" "You knew that. I told you as much the first time we met in Central Park." "But I haven't seen you around much lately. It kind of seems like you only show up when I'm in danger." "Well, that's when your powers are most likely to appear. I need to be there to catch you when it happens." "So you can lure me back to your lair and extract my soul?" Half of his mouth pulled into a crooked grin, somehow looking more charming than calculating. I was such a fool for being attracted to a guy who just admitted to stalking me so he could eventually kill me. I like the word lair. It makes me sound like a mastermind. It struck me that Tate and I actually had similar goals now. He wanted my powers to appear just as badly as I did, and I didn't have any reason to fear him anymore. Now that I knew I was a full-blooded Atlantean, he wouldn't be able to extract my soul. I wasn't fractured, but I didn't have to tell him that. You know, if you're going to follow me around the city, you may as well walk beside me instead of lurking in the shadows. He stopped and looked me dead in the eye. Side by side, it was much more evident how tall he was. He stood a good foot higher than my 5'6" frame. I had to lift my chin to maintain eye contact. "You're not afraid of me anymore?" he said. "Why?" "You don't look very scary to me. Besides, if you were truly evil, you would have let me die when I fell off the yacht, or when the gallery exploded." "That's an over-exaggeration. The gallery didn't explode." "Or when Clayton tried to drown me, or when Osborne tried to break my arm. Should I go on?" "You do have a habit of getting yourself into trouble." "If you're so determined to take my soul, assuming I'm even fractured, why don't you try to get my powers jump-started yourself?" Tate paused, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his mind. "Do you know something I don't?" "Guess you'll have to wait and see." I touched my fingertip to his chest on the last word and turned to walk ahead without him, ignoring the jolt of electricity that still had my hand tingling from where we touched. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder and spotted Tate standing motionless on the sidewalk, his hand over the spot where I touched him. Chapter 20. I chickened out. I couldn't bring myself to take the vision-inducing pills. Maybe it was my conscience, or intuition, or maybe it was the glowing yellow glare of my owl's eyes through the window. But every time I picked up the envelope, I heard a voice in my brain that told me to set it back down again. Technically, I was still immortal until my powers kicked in, and taking an unknown substance like that now could be deadly. I would reconsider taking the pills once I was officially Atlantean. Until then, I would just dream of what having powers might feel like. I tried to play it cool the next day. I didn't want to reveal the news about my powers to my friends until I had proof. It almost seemed too good to be true, even to me, but it must have been written all over my face. "I don't mean any offense by this, but are you feeling okay?" Sean studied me a little too closely on our walk to campus the next morning. "I feel great. Why?" My voice came out in an overly enthusiastic high pitch, destroying any plausibility that I was telling the truth. His eyes narrowed further. "Something's up." "Nope, you're wrong." We stopped outside of my classroom building. Normally, Sean would have waved goodbye here and continued toward his own class, but he seemed dead set on getting to the bottom of my mood. He crossed his arms over his chest and opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I knew just the thing to keep him moving. "How's Abby doing? She mentioned you guys might hang out this weekend." His jaw snapped shut and he shook his head. "See you after class, Ev." Ha, sucker. I was about to turn for the building when I spotted a familiar face across the lawn. He was too far away for me to be certain, but he looked a lot like the sick little mortal boy I saw the day before. He checked his watch and glanced around like he was waiting for someone. Was he doing another deal with Viv, maybe? This seemed like a bad place to go unnoticed. I knew I should have ignored him and gone to class. It was the right thing to do. It's what Dom would have done. But who knew how long it would be before my powers came in? Millie mentioned it could be weeks. And here was his fractured soul right in front of me. I could talk to him now and possibly find my mom today if he was willing to lead me to Rasputin. Why would I wait for my powers to come in when I could get my mom back today? Ignoring the faulty logic behind my scheme, I moved for the boy. He glanced up and locked eyes with me again. As soon as he realized I was heading for him, he turned and jogged off toward the opposite side of campus. I picked up my pace as well. That same voice in my head that urged me to set down the pills at home was screaming at me now to stop and turn back for class. And there was adrenaline pumping through my veins now. I was high on the thrill of a good mystery, and common sense went right out the window. He disappeared between some cars in a parking lot up ahead. I ran harder to see where he went when my owl flapped down and landed on a curb. I frowned at the creature. I already know this guy is probably bad news. You don't have to tell me, but I need to talk to him. The owl tilted its head at me, and I swore I could hear my conscience yelling at me to go to class again. But I was so close. I just needed to see where the boy went. I took just a second to catch my breath and rub at the spot on the back of my head. A headache was ramping up again, throbbing with my heavy breathing. Ignoring it the best I could, I stepped over the curb and looked both ways in the parking lot. An engine started in the next aisle over, so I hurried toward the noise. A blue sedan backed out of a narrow spot, and the mousy brown hair of the mortal boy was visible through the back window. "Hey!" I called out, though I knew he wouldn't be able to hear me. Even if he did hear me, he had no reason to stop. I certainly wouldn't have stopped for some panting girl who chased me across campus and yelled at me in a parking lot. I knew what I was doing didn't make any sense, and yet I couldn't stop. I moved forward with the intention of tapping on his trunk, but a pair of sturdy arms caught me before I could get near the car. I froze, knowing who it was before he even spoke. A buzz shot through my limbs, and my heartbeat quickened. "What in the world are you doing?" I turned to face Tate, and the sensation strengthened. He quickly released me, and I suspected he'd felt it too. "I'm trying to catch that guy." I turned to follow the car, which was headed toward the exit of the parking lot. "Why?" Tate jogged up to my side. "Because he has some information that I need. It's important." "You're not making any sense. That guy doesn't know anything. He's immortal." "I don't think so. I think he's fractured." Tate's eyes widened just a fraction. "Are you sure?" "Yes. No. I strongly suspect it." "Then we've got to follow him." "Yes. Wait." Tate was already gone. He ran ahead to a young woman who just set her water bottle on top of a car as she loaded the back seat with her books. He leaned in and spoke quietly to her. Next thing I knew, she grinned widely and handed him the keys. Tate glanced over his shoulder and hollered at me to get in. This wasn't how I pictured my morning going, not at all. But I wouldn't object to Tate chasing after the fractured boy, as long as I could tag along. I would just have to find some way to speak to the boy privately before Tate stole his soul. Okay, so maybe it wasn't such a great idea after all. I pulled the car door closed behind me as a vehicle was already rolling forward after the fractured boy. "Do you steal cars from unsuspecting mortals often?" He cut me a sideways glance. "About as often as you chase people across campus." "Well played," I mumbled with a grin. "So why do you think this guy is fractured?" I chewed on the inside of my lip. Should I tell him the truth? On one hand, I wouldn't mind throwing that pretty little Olympian girl under the bus, but I didn't want to upset him. Never mind. He was a hunter. I didn't care about his feelings. "Your girlfriend gave him some drugs." "Who?" "Viv. I saw them doing a deal yesterday. He's definitely not a keeper, so I assume he must be fractured." Tate made a choking sound. "First of all, Viv is not my girlfriend." He shuddered. "Second of all, if you're sure you spotted her giving him something, then he's most definitely up to no good." He cut his eyes over to me again. "I'm glad you didn't take the stuff she gave you, by the way." "Would it have killed me?" "Definitely, and your fractured soul would have been permanently lost." We'd caught up to the blue sedan, and we drove quietly for several minutes. My head was really pounding now, and I could see my pulse inching in around the edges of my eyesight with every heartbeat. Thankfully, Tate was driving, not me. He did a good job of trailing the car without drawing the driver's attention. I wondered if he'd trailed many fractured souls like this before. After a bit, I dug a little deeper into the pills, asking the question that had been dancing on the tip of my tongue. Would those pills kill a keeper, too? No, we're immortal. Nothing short of a millennium can kill a keeper. That's not true. Tate's brows wrinkled and he shot me a quick glance again. Who told you that? Does it matter? He sighed and continued driving, ignoring my question. His face remained tense, though, like there was more he wanted to say, but he didn't. We drove on for quite some time until we reached an industrial part of the city. Worn buildings lined the road with broken glass windows and boarded-up doors. The car turned down an empty road of warehouses toward the Long Island Sound and stopped at an abandoned-looking building at the end of the road. Tate moved past the street and parked around the corner. You stay here. Okay. There was no use arguing. If I refused, he'd glamour me and force me to stay put. But if I played along, there was still a chance I could act on my own accord. Tate climbed out of the car, but he paused before closing the door. Leaning back in to face me, his expression grew serious. I mean it, mortal. Don't leave this car. If there are other hunters here, they'll assume the worst about you. They won't wait for proof. Got it, I swallowed, waiting for his eyes to glow or his voice to change. But after a long pause, he closed the door and jogged around the corner toward the fractured boy. I released a pent-up breath the moment he disappeared from my view. If Tate thought there would be other hunters here, this was a much bigger deal than I thought. Could that sick mortal boy be meeting with Rasputin himself? I wouldn't wait to find out. Chapter 21. I counted to 30 before slowly easing open my car door. The sun shone brightly, and 2 slow clouds lazily crawled across the blue sky. The calm, quiet atmosphere definitely did not match the excitement surging through my bones. In fact, it seemed a little too quiet. There were millions of people in this city. Why wasn't anyone around mid-morning on a Monday? We were in an industrial zone. It should have been bustling with trucks and deliveries and hard-working men and women carrying out their daily tasks. Shaking off the uneasy feeling trying to settle into my gut, I snuck up to the corner and peeked around, staring at the empty road where Tate and the fractured boy had disappeared. There was just nothing. Where had they gone? Aside from a few other cars parked at the very end of the road, there was no evidence of life anywhere. I crept forward, trying my best to stick to the shadows cast by the dilapidated building to my left. There was a doorway about halfway down the block. My guess was that they'd gone inside. A moment later I reached the door, large and rusty, where the old blue paint had chipped off. There was no handle, no knob, no knocker, and no peephole. It must have been an exit only. Even so, I wedged my fingers into the edge and tried to pry it open. It wouldn't budge. I exhaled and looked around again. Nothing had changed. The street was empty, and the area was quiet, aside from the waves and a cool breeze I could just barely make out coming from the Long Island Sound at the end of the road. I took just a moment to enjoy the quiet, grateful that my already pounding head didn't have to endure honking horns and sirens and shouts. My eye settled on the boy's blue sedan. Unsure of what else to do, I dashed over to the vehicle and crouched down low. The passenger's door was locked. Keeping myself near the ground, I inched around to the other side. The driver's door was locked, too. What now? I rose just enough to peek inside the windows. I didn't know what I expected to find. Ambrosia? Keeper paraphernalia? A book of spells? This was silly. With no other clear options, there was nothing else to do but go back to the car and wait for Tate. I stood to move in that direction when a flapping sound drew my attention overhead. A flash of white feathers flew low and landed on the chain-link fence at the end of the road. "What are you doing here?" I asked my owl. The bird swiveled its head on its small, fluffy body, turning to look at rows of giant metal shipping containers stacked up on the other side of the fence. The water of the Sound glimmered in the sunlight just beyond them. "It's locked," I said, noting the heavy metal chain wrapped around the gate. The owl tilted its head hard to the right and blinked at me. I shrugged. "I don't know what you want me to do." The bird turned its head again, taking its time to deliberately look toward the shipping containers and then back at me. "I can't just climb over." Its sentient yellow eyes narrowed. "You seriously want me to jump a fence in broad daylight? As if that won't draw any negative attention." The owl looked back and forth down the empty road before settling back on me. He had a point. There was no one around. "Fine." I marched up to the fence, cast one final glance warily over my shoulder to be sure no one was around, then scrambled up as quickly as I could. Swinging one leg over the top, I became instantly grateful for two things. One, there was no barbed wire, and two, I wore jeans today. I wasn't a child anymore, and climbing fences was a lot rougher than I remembered it being when I was younger. Finally, my feet touched concrete on the other side. I glared at the bird. Now what? It launched into flight and landed in between a couple of the shipping containers a few yards away. Hesitantly, I followed it. There was no kind of rail or anything around the edge of the cargo dock the containers were stacked upon, and the water made me nervous. It shouldn't have been too deep, but I didn't like being so close to it anyway. I'd just stick to the center of the slab. As I neared the first row of containers, I heard the soft hum of voices, but I had no idea where they were coming from. The stacks of metal boxes made a labyrinth of dirt and grime, and the noise bounced off the sides of the containers in strange ways, leaving me thoroughly confused. All I knew was that I didn't want to get close to the water. I didn't want to accidentally stumble upon those voices either. And to make matters worse, my owl had essentially disappeared. I could have sworn I saw him land right where I stood, but he was nowhere to be seen. I didn't dare call out to him. Perhaps he'd landed in the next aisle over. Carefully, and oh so slowly, I eased around the corner of a container, keeping my back flush against the metal, and tried to get a glimpse of the other side. I needed to make sure the coast was clear, but I never expected to find the pair of golden eyes waiting on the other side. Osborne was inches from my face, waiting for me. And before I could even think about moving, he spoke in the entrancing tone of 100 different melodies. "Freeze." I had no choice but to obey. "I knew it," he said, moving around the edge to get a better look at me. I was still motionless, held in the same awkward position I'd been in when he commanded me to freeze. My back was flat against the shipping container, and my head was crooked in an unnatural position around the corner. The pose, combined with a racing pulse, did little to help my headache. It had grown into an all-encompassing pain now, my vision blinking in and out with every beat of my heart, like a strobe light. "Knew what?" I asked, swallowing down my panic. Tate said other hunters wouldn't wait for proof, and no other hunter wanted me dead as much as Osborne did. "Knew I'd find you here, with the rest of your kind." "You're wrong. I'm not fractured, and you can't hurt me." "I beg to differ." Osborne sneered and began pacing before me. "All I have to do is prove that I put forth my best effort. Mortals don't stumble around fractured meeting sites, and I'm sorry to tell you this, but the meeting is a farce anyway. Rasputin isn't even here. I put out the lie myself to draw out the other evil souls like yours. That's how a real hunter gets the job done. I never expected such a large turnout, though." "I told you, I'm not fractured." "Prove it." "I have no powers. Isn't that proof enough? Fractured souls, by definition, have partial powers. I have none. I'll coax them out of you. He grinned and pulled something metal out of his pocket, then slipped it onto his hand. Brass knuckles. They say all it takes is a little trauma. Too bad your prince isn't here to save you now. He reared back his fist, and I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for impact. Chapter 22. The hit never came. My eyes opened again to find the world as utterly frozen as I was. Osborne's hateful face was locked in a perpetual sneer, just a foot from mine, his fist pulled back above his shoulder. This couldn't be real. There was no way something like this was possible, but there he was, unblinking, unbreathing. It was as if the whole world had stopped. No, not the whole world. I gasped as I watched my owl flutter down and land on the shipping container behind Osborne. It blinked at me, and suddenly I knew the freeze was about to break. It was like I heard that voice in my head again, giving me a ready, set, go, and we were back to normal. The sunlight glinted off of the metal knuckles adorning Osborne's hand as his fist reached prime position. But just as he prepared to swing it forward, a flash of white appeared from the sky, flying 100 miles an hour and dive-bombing straight into Osborne's head. The owl connected with Osborne's before he could hit me, and a flutter of white feathers went flying as he cursed loudly. The glamour broke, along with Osborne's concentration, and I ran, hard. His footsteps were hot on my heels as I rounded the corner, no longer fearing who else I might run into. No one would be as terrifying as Osborne. I ran the length of 2 more shipping containers and turned the corner again, finding myself in a small open area with a crowd of about 10 or 12 men and women, mortals by the look of them, squished together in the center. They were silent, frozen, just as I had been moments earlier, and their clothes flapped in a wind that only seemed to affect their small group. "Stop!" Tate's voice yelled out from somewhere overhead. I looked up to find him standing on a stack of containers beside a tall, dark-skinned man who appeared to be carved from stone. The man was inhumanly handsome, and the lines of his muscles were sharp as the sun cast shadows over his shirtless torso. Agarthian. Another hunter? This was bad. Electricity danced over my skin as I drew nearer to Tate, but he wasn't watching me. His eyes were on Osborne as he called his command again, this time with 1,000 layers of intricate harmonies. "Stop right there," he said, his words laced with glamour. But it didn't work. I could still move. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder as I reached the shipping container Tate and the other Agarthian stood upon and saw Osborne motionless before the group of terrified humans. "Give me your hand." Tate was flat on his stomach, reaching down to me over the edge of the container. I didn't hesitate. My skin came alive where his hand wrapped around mine, and the ground fell away beneath my feet as he pulled me effortlessly to the top of the stack. "What did you do to Daniel?" Osborne's wicked voice drew my attention back to the ground. He was struggling to move, fighting against Tate's glamour and looking like his feet were stuck in wet cement. I turned to the other Agarthian man beside us, Daniel, and noticed that he too was frozen. A small sweat glistened off of Tate's forehead as he worked to maintain his concentration and rescue me at the same time. "I told you to stay in the car," he said. "I'm not a very good listener." Understatement of the year. "Daniel!" Osborne's voice took on a tone of glamour now, too. Magic rolled off of his tongue. The man beside us turned slowly to face him. "You are released from Thaddeus's control. Do not let the girl escape." "No!" Tate cried out, but he was too late. He and the Agarthian man shrank away as I was swept up high into the air, arms pinned to my sides by an invisible and powerful wind. Below me, I could see the small group of humans staring up with mouths agape. Daniel stood on the roof of the shipping container, arms extended above his head, holding me in the air with wind that came from his fingertips. Tate could do nothing to Daniel without also injuring me in the process. One major hit would drop me from the sky, and there was no way my frail mortal body could sustain that kind of impact. I would splat like a bug on the front of an 18-wheeler. Rather than risk the danger associated with Daniel, Tate focused his efforts on Osborne, who was freely moving again now that Tate was too distracted to hold the glamour. He leaped down from the roof and dove for Osborne. There were shouts, but nothing I could make out from as high as I was in the air. There was absolutely nothing I could do. I was trapped. Glancing over my shoulder, I remembered that I was also surrounded by water on 3 sides, and I didn't know which would be a worse way to die. Hitting the ground would be messy, but there was a chance it would be over before I realized it even hurt. But the water? I wouldn't die from impact if I dropped into the Sound. No, I'd sink slowly to the filthy bottom, holding my breath until my lungs burned and cried out for oxygen. Choking and drowning would be the worst option, no question. The world spun around me, my head throbbing forcefully. Millie had said the headaches were a symptom of my powers coming in. This was a traumatic event, right? Surely being flung up into the air by an invisible wind held by your arch-enemy's equally powerful crony qualified. But was it enough to bring my true nature to light? I closed my eyes, tuning out everything except the way the wind whipped strands of hair across my cheeks. My mother was a messenger, like Devon. Maybe I inherited her powers. I thought about how Devon appeared in the storeroom at Millie's apothecary. He'd arrived out of nowhere, as though he cut right through the fabric of this world and stepped into it from another. I could do that too. I had to. My pulse quickened, along with the throbbing in my head, and right as it seemed to reach a fever pitch, I did it. Well, I thought about doing it. Technically, my hands were still pinned to my sides, but mentally, I cut right through that invisible wind that bound me. I imagined stepping straight through it, right out of this world and into nothing. I stepped nowhere. My eyes opened to see the same terrifying sight as before. All I got from my efforts was a worsened headache. Tate and Osborne rolled over one another in a good old-fashioned fistfight down below. I supposed when 2 sirens squared off against each other, their glamour became ineffective, and Daniel couldn't help his friend, not without dropping me. After a particularly solid hit to Osborne's jaw, Tate broke away. He reached for the top of the shipping containers and gracefully pulled himself up like a panther leaping into a tree. He landed with ease and turned his focus back to Daniel. Osborne wasn't far behind, reaching for the container right behind Tate. Hurry, I thought. If Osborne gets to Daniel before you, I'm toast. Tate looked up to me, and even from my height, I could see the gold of his eyes glittering with determination in the sunshine. He moved away from the edge, dashing around to the other side of Daniel, right as Osborne reached the rooftop. Daniel turned, and I went flying with him. His hands barely moved, but I probably flew 30 feet across the sky. Hurry up, Tate. Do something. He and Osborne circled around Daniel, who must have been getting shaky. My steady, invisible wind prison in the sky grew more turbulent with every passing second. I heard shouting again, but still couldn't make out what the guys were saying over the whipping of the wind and the distance between us. Then I saw it, a flash of white from the corner of my eye. I turned in time to see my friend, my true hero, the owl, right as he swooped down from across the way. A grin spread across my face. I was going to be saved. I watched with bated breath as the owl dove straight for Daniel. Wait, I whispered to myself as I understood what was happening. Wait, no! The owl collided with Daniel's outstretched arms, and all three men turned to me with similar looks of shock as Daniel's control over me was severed. The owl's impact sent me flying fast, moving almost horizontally through the air before I began my descent. And as I began my fall, I swore I heard a familiar voice in my mind. It said everything was going to be okay. I looked at the rapidly approaching water and prayed that the voice was right. Chapter 23. The water came at me like a wall, the murkiness of its depths contrasted by the light reflecting off of its choppy surface. Other details came to me as well, like a water bug paddling lazily across the top of a wave, and the bubbles that popped up to the surface near the cement wall of the cargo dock. And then it dawned on me. I wasn't falling anymore. Or rather, I wasn't speeding toward the water. I reached out and touched the surface, the tips of my fingers barely breaking through to the wetness below. Had Daniel stopped me? No. The wind was gone. I scanned back over the water's surface to confirm my suspicions. The bug was still. The bubbles ceased. Time had stopped. Again. Maybe it was the owl. He was the only piece of the world still alive the last time this happened. "What am I supposed to do?" I yelled. But the owl didn't respond. Of course it didn't respond. It was an animal, and it was still up on the dock with the Agarthians. I reached out to slap the water out of frustration. A small splash was followed by concentric rings of waves. I watched them in awe as they moved unnaturally through the otherwise motionless, dark surface. I could still interact with the world. The world just couldn't interact with me. How very interesting. Everything is going to be okay. It wasn't a voice I heard, not exactly. There weren't physical words or sounds in my brain, but there was a reassurance. Maybe it was just me talking to myself, but at this point, anything was possible. I believed the words, no matter where they came from. And just as quickly as everything had stopped, time snapped back into motion, and I plunged headfirst into the cold and dirty water of the Long Island Sound. Air escaping my lungs bubbled up from my mouth as I dropped through the water. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't prepared. I hadn't even gotten a final lungful of air to last me a couple of short, final minutes. I opened my eyes, looking for something I could possibly grab a hold of to stop me from sinking to the bottom. If I had any breath left, the sight before me would have taken it all away. I could see everything, every particle of dust, every piece of trash lining the bottom of the Sound, every bug and fish that surrounded me. It was like I watched the water through a lens. I paused for a moment, staring in wonder at the way the sun's rays bent through the waves to glitter off the silvery scales of a tiny school of fish wiggling their bodies past me. I reached for one, momentarily distracted by their beauty. The fish swam away too fast for me to touch, but me? I wasn't moving much at all. My feet swayed back and forth, casually treading water like I'd seen so many people do before. It was a skill I'd never mastered. And now, I didn't even have to think about it. The skill had become ingrained within me. It was part of me now. I kicked harder, propelling myself up to the water's surface as easily as I might kick a playground ball. My cheeks broke free, feeling the breeze and the sunshine kiss my face. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted more. With a grin, I dove back under the water, faster and freer than I'd ever felt on land. I sped through the water, delighting in the feel of its ripples across my skin. My lungs didn't burn. I didn't feel the need to come up for air at all. It was like I didn't have to breathe. Or maybe I was breathing. All I knew was that this was what life was supposed to feel like. With a kick and a twirl, I circled back through the waves to the area where I'd first fallen in. As much as I would have loved to swim and play in the water all day, there were some major issues taking place on the cargo dock. Tate was fighting against two of his own kind, and he needed help. An hour before, I was a worthless companion for him, just dead weight he had to fight to keep alive. But now I felt power surging through my muscles. My blood pumped energy and vitality to every stretch of my body. I was strong. I was Atlantean, and there was nothing Osborne could do to stop me. I reached the edge of the concrete and came up to the air just in time to see my hunter dive into the sound above me. His entire body seemed to glow with a warm, earthy golden hue, almost tangerine in color, like a sunset or the light of dawn. I stilled, entranced by the sight of him. He'd had a running start and flew out across the water's surface, breaking through like a swan, elegant but strong. I waited a moment longer to see if Osborne or Daniel would follow, but no one came. Tate was alone. With a grin, I dove back in and spotted the back of his head as he scanned the water below, looking for me. I reached him in half a second, and he spun around to face me at the exact moment I reached him. Something went taut in my chest as his eyes met mine, and I felt drawn to reach out and touch him, like there was an invisible thread tying us together. I reached for his hand, the electric sensation that bloomed between us feeling stronger than ever beneath the water, and motioned upward. His eyes grew to $50, and with one kick I propelled us both back up to the surface. We emerged through the surface of the sound, and Tate shook water free from his hair and his eyes, then pulled his hand from mine. His jaw dropped, and his breathing was heavy. "You're swimming!" I grinned. "I'm pretty good at it, too." He reached slowly toward my face and paused, pulling his hand back again and examining it. I still felt it, too, a humming sensation, pleasant and warm where we'd touched. "You're not fractured." His voice was barely a whisper, and confusion contorted his handsome features. "Nope, I'm Atlantean." His face remained twisted as his eyes darted back and forth over me. He shook his head. "No, you're not Atlantean." "What are you talking about?" I looked around, my senses sharper than humanly possible. I could hear birds chirping a few blocks over in the small park near a pier. I smelled the exhaust of a delivery vehicle somewhere in the distance and noted the logo of a passenger plane soaring through the clouds overhead. I was strong. I was full of life. I was definitely a keeper now. "Your aura, it's not like anything I've ever seen." "I don't understand." The sound of footsteps over my shoulder clattered loudly through my ears. Osborne and Daniel were on their way. Tate put a hand on my shoulder and shoved me back under the water, pushing hard until I floated beneath his feet. And there I stayed, certain that he must have had a good reason to keep me hidden from them. What had he meant about my aura? I'd seen his, a gorgeous golden color, like the sunlight of an autumn morning. But looking down at my own arms and legs, I saw nothing. What did Tate see? And what was it supposed to look like? Whatever it was, he didn't trust it to keep me safe from Osborne. Though the water was plenty murky enough to conceal me at my current depth, I swam lower, nearing the bottom of the sound, just to be safe. I didn't know how much time had passed, and I realized it didn't matter. I could stay under the water forever if I wanted to. Being an Atlantean was amazing. When Tate's face reappeared below the water's surface, searching for me, I was almost reluctant to leave. Almost. But the feeling in my chest drew me upward, closer to him. He took my hand, and together we swam back up to the water's surface. Back up top, Tate scanned me again. His beautiful eyes moved quickly over every inch of me, as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "I can't take your soul," he said. "Because it's whole?" I said hopefully. "I'm not fractured." "No, you're not fractured. I don't know what you are." Chapter 24. I feel awful about soaking this poor girl's upholstery in salt water. I looked at Tate in the driver's seat to see if my efforts to lighten the mood had any effect on him at all, but he remained lost in thought. I sighed. Are you going to explain to me what is going on or not? You said my aura wasn't Atlantean. What is it then? He glanced warily at me from the corners of his eyes, then turned back to the road without answering. I groaned and leaned my head against the window. I'll leave her some money, he said. Huh? To have the car detailed. That water is rancid. The water didn't seem all that bad to me, but maybe it was due to my new affinity for it. The car rolled to a stop in front of my apartment building. Thanks for bringing me home, I said. Tate killed the engine and pushed his door open. Oh, I'm not dropping you off. I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out. I ignored the thrill of excitement I felt at the thought of hanging out with Tate a little while longer. I simply nodded. No one wants to understand what you're talking about more than I do. He pulled open the door to my building and allowed me to step in before him. He was such a gentlemanly assassin. We walked to the elevator, and I couldn't help but notice how Tate shifted nervously on his feet as the doors closed us in together. The elevator had never felt so small. The feeling in my chest emerged again, and I resisted the pull to him. We were like opposite ends of a magnet, fighting to prevent ourselves from snapping right together. I looked away, determining the buzzy tingle that washed over me was still a warning. If I wasn't a true Atlantean, as Tate indicated, could he still hunt me? Was my soul still in danger? It was the only explanation I had for this strange sensation I continued to feel when I was near him. The doors opened on my floor, and we raced each other to exit the elevator, each of us eager to put some space between ourselves. But the plan backfired. We ran into each other and stumbled clumsily out into the hallway. His hands settled on my hips to steady me when I tripped, and he didn't immediately pull them away. His heart raced as fast as mine. I could hear it now with my heightened senses. His eyes dropped down to my lips, and I lifted my chin without even thinking. But he didn't kiss me. He lifted a hand and brushed his thumb across my chin and up onto my lower lip. Your scar is gone. His thumb lingered there, warm and soft, and I didn't want him to pull it away. His touch was everything. It was like I was under his spell, but there was no glamour there. And based on the look in his eyes, he was just as enchanted. The sound of a door slamming open down the hall startled us quickly apart. I turned to find Dom's wide eyes staring back at me. Everly, you... Never mind. I'm glad you're here. I need your help. Her face was pale and twisted into a terror I couldn't imagine. Tate and I rushed over to the apartment and followed Dom inside. Gayla lay prone in the middle of our living room floor, convulsing. I immediately dropped by her side, Dom taking position across from me. Reaching for her hand, I pleaded with her softly. Gayla, can you hear me? Please, please, you've got to be all right. I looked up at Dom, noting the panic flashing in her eyes. What happened? I don't know. I just got back from class and found her like this. I walked in just before you did. I don't know, she said again, her voice cracking. Tate crossed the room and picked up a small brown envelope from the arm of our couch, cursing under his breath. He crushed the empty paper in his fist. It's the pills from Viv. Pills? Dom asked. What's going to happen to her? Is she dying? I gently moved a piece of white blonde hair from her face. He knelt beside us and felt her forehead. Then, with careful fingers, he lifted her lids. Dom and I gasped in unison. Her beautiful brown eyes were deep black pools, swirling in a way that reminded me of an ominous thunderhead before a storm. Foam leaked from the corners of her mouth as her body continued to be racked with violent tremors. I don't think so, Tate said. Just stay here with her until this passes. We held her hands, and I whispered silent prayers until all of a sudden it stopped. Her body went rigid as a board, then her eyes popped open, and she sat up tall, ramrod straight. "Scoot back," Tate said. We did as we were told. Gayla said nothing at first. She didn't move. She barely looked to be breathing. When her lips finally parted, it wasn't her voice we heard at all. It was a sound of another creature, 1,000 otherworldly voices speaking as one. "He sees you coming, Deliverer. He knows your story. They've hidden him in the cleft of the rock, but the beacon still stands. He watches the waves. He waits for you. It won't be long now. It won't be long. He sees you coming. Go. Go now. You must go." Gayla stilled again. Her lids grew heavy and closed over the storms in her eyes. She swayed, and Dom dove forward with a pillow to catch her fall just before she hit the floor. I reached out and released a breath of relief as I felt her pulse, strong and regular. "I think she's going to be all right," I said. "But what was that?" "A vision," Tate said. "It's never happened like that before." Dom shook her head. "Where did the drugs come from?" She glared first at Tate, then turned her hard eyes on me. "Oh, Everly." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know. She's going to be okay, though, right, Tate?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think she just needs to rest. But those words..." He turned to Dom. "What do you know about the Deliverer?" "Nothing. I've never heard anything like that in my life." Tate frowned. "What do you know about it, Tate?" I asked. "Is this something we should be concerned about?" "I don't know. I remember a story about it. I only heard the full tale once, as a child." He scratched the back of his head. "Technically, I overheard it during one of my brother's lessons." Dom made an O shape with her mouth, and I suspected there were a few more layers to that simple statement, but I'd have to save my questions for another time. "There were rumors once of a prophecy. It spoke of a deliverer who would one day come to the earth and reunite the people, every race, every creed, every color. But the change would destroy the keepers. It's folklore, of course, just something parents used to tell their children when they fought with their siblings. They'd warn the children to settle down or they might bring on the deliverer." He laughed humorlessly. "But several years ago, a man became obsessed with the so-called prophecy. He lost his mind while trying to piece it together. The lesson I heard given to my brother was more of a reminder. We are to erase evidence of this story from our history. It's damaging when taken seriously, and my brother was instructed to report any indication that the rumors may be spreading through Agartha." Chill bumps dotted my arms. "So what does that vision mean, then?" "I don't know. There are lots of things I can't explain today." "Like Everly's new aura?" Dom shot a knowing look in Tate's direction. "That's one thing." It was then that I noticed a faint lavender glow emanating from Dom and Gayla. Their auras. They were subtle, easily overlooked, unless one was searching for them. It was almost like I had to shift my eyes into a different line of sight to see them. Agarthians were gold, and Olympians were purple. "What color are Atlantean auras?" Dom and Tate exchanged worried looks. "A deep blue-green," Dom said. "Like the ocean," Tate added. "And what color is mine?" I looked back down at my arms, seeing nothing. "White." This has been Fractured Secrets, Daughter of Sea and Sky, Book 2. Part 2.